Welcome to the Manual Channel. I'm your host, Dan Gall, and today's guest is Bruce Russell, who is not only the National Ambassador for Wild Turkey, but also part of the family distilling team. But before we get started, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe. Bruce, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here, Dan.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. You know, Wild Turkey has a rich history, especially with your family being at the helm of distilling there for generations, which is a super interesting and unique story. Can you share some of your earliest memories of growing up around a distillery and what that experience was like for you?
Yeah, it's probably different than most people imagine because I grew up in Lawrenceburg, so it's a little bitty small town, but we do have two of the biggest distilleries, in the U.S. there. So most of the people that I grew up around, they either worked in bourbon or had family that worked in bourbon. So I just figured that's what everybody did when I was a little kid. I grew up going to the distillery a lot because my dad's work was fun. You know, there was always people moving around and rolling barrels and bottling up. And I knew everybody that worked there, even when I was a young kid, because it's such a small community. So, people would sneak me candy or give me $1 to get into the vending machine. And I thought my dad had the coolest job in the world. Which, looking back on it, he's not a very small guy, and they had him stuck in this like broom closet they had gutted out for his computer desk because he was the only guy when I was a kid that had a computer at the whole distillery. But his office was right next door to the employee break room, the union break room, and so I had access to what I thought were the coolest vending machines ever because our parent company at the time also owned Yoo-Hoo chocolate drink. So I
Oh,
would get
wow.
basically unlimited Yoo-Hoo, and it was a union break room, so it wasn't just like candy bars and stuff. There were full-fledged meals and sandwiches and all kinds of good snacks. And so I thought Dad's work was awesome because he'd give me a couple dollars or somebody else there would, and then I could go get free snacks in the vending machines.
You were living the dream.
I was, yeah, for 5, 6, 7-year-old kid for sure.
Yeah, and then what kind of trouble did you get in there? Because obviously it's going to be on property, and Lawrenceburg, I'm sure, is just a beautiful landscape of the rolling hills and the forest there. What was that like?
Well, I think you take it for granted when you live there. It's not really been since I started traveling and stuff that I come back home and I'm like, it is really pretty where I grew up. Grew up right there, like next to the distillery grounds is the Kentucky River. So grew up out on the river a whole lot. My dad had a little boat, and we'd go tubing and kneeboarding and fishing and all that kind of stuff. And then, at the distillery itself, back when I was younger, it was more common to have family members running around. It's a little bit more serious now, and it was always fun because my granddad was like the top boss, and my dad was, when I was a kid, he was a warehouse guy, and so his warehouse crews knew if they could drag me along or get me in trouble, that like Dad couldn't be mad at them because it was me, so they could kind of get away with doing a little less work, I guess, if I was around. So I had a
Yeah,
bunch of fun running rick houses and
yeah.
stuff for sure.
Bring Bruce along, right? Like we can do whatever we
Yeah,
want. Yeah.
exactly.
So is that part of your guys' legacy? Like the multi-generational aspect of that is you're not just getting thrown into distilling, but you're doing other roles within Wild Turkey and kind of working your way up.
It's been a thing for, I think, all of us, that one of the things that my granddad, kind of wanted my dad to do was learn it from the ground up. And a similar thing for me, but times have changed, when Dad started in 81, and definitely when my granddad Jimmy started, the master distiller's role, or the people that were behind the brand, your role was only production. So my grandpa's main role for the first probably 40 years of his 70 years, 35 years, was just making sure the plant ran right, making sure the whiskey was good. He did not care at all about marketing. He did not care at all about sales. He didn't even care that much about efficiency. He just cared about, was the whiskey tasting good when it came out of the barrel. And then he was one of the people really that changed the industry in the mid 80s by traveling and becoming kind of a brand ambassador, not just for our brand, but for bourbon. So for me, it was a lot different than both of them because not only did I learn the distillery side, but I had to learn the sales and marketing side as well, because that's such a huge part of our jobs now.
How did that shape your approach to bourbon making? Because you are on the distilling team now, and how long have you been on the distilling team for now?
I've been a part of the kind of the production side of things and product development now, officially for about a year and a half. I've kind of unofficially been involved for since about 2019 when I came back to the distillery because I lived out of state for a few years, came back, started working at the distillery again, and Dad's always been one to, kind of let me do my own thing. Wants to see what I have to think, and has let me have a hand in making a lot of products, and it's been great. But the way that the things have changed, like I went to school specifically to learn the marketing side of things because I knew Dad and Jimmy could teach me kind of the whiskey making thing. It's Jimmy learned from a guy that started making whiskey before Prohibition. He taught Dad. Dad was teaching me, and Dad was really the one that kind of gave me the advice. Like he basically said, "Hey, for me, it was much more difficult to learn the other side of the industry, kind of the corporate side, the marketing side, the sales side. So if you can get that, then you'll have a better chance to take off soon. You won't have to wait years and years and years to learn that." And it really did help me quite a bit because by the time I got involved in product development, I already knew not only the marketing and stuff, but I kind of had an idea of what our fans wanted, what our consumers wanted, what our bartending and liquor store partners and our distributors wanted, and that's a huge part of it now.
How do you discover that? How do you find out what your consumers and fans and distributors and everybody what they're looking for? Besides what you guys are known for, the Wild Turkey 101, like what your granddad like really solidified and made consistent, right? So like how do you know what's next?
Well, a part of it is something that I think Jimmy's kind of somewhat built his legacy on is building relationships. So, I grew up as a kid, sometimes going with Jimmy or Dad to bar or liquor store or distributor meetings and stuff like that. And that's a big part of it is building relationships and having kind of a camaraderie with the people that you work with. Because something that Jimmy always says is like, we're all a part of this. Like it takes everybody from the guys rolling the barrels to the master distillers to the people that write about our product, the people that sell our product, the people that drink our product are super important. It takes everybody. And so, if somebody wants to tell you what they think, sit and listen because you might get an idea from it. But it was way harder for them than it was for me because I grew up with the internet. So if I want to know what people are thinking, it's really easy to get on social media or look at blogs or look at a YouTube or check out articles online because there's no shortage of people that are going to tell you what they think about bourbon, about your brand. And, it could probably seem overwhelming or annoying to have like all these people telling you all the time, but man, it's really helped us. There's a lot of products that we've done now, recently that came, if not directly, indirectly because of fan input or consumer input. And it's really helped us.
What are some of those products?
I would say that some of the extensions of the Russell's line, so like the 13 and the 15 particularly, because we saw this huge growth in fanfare for our Russell's private barrels. So kind of our Russell's private barrels have become not only something we're really known for, but like something I'm told all the time by our fans. Like that is the one thing that I look for at any liquor store. If they have their own private barrel, I'm collecting them or that's my favorite thing you all make. And we realized like, hey, we've really got something here with some of these really special rick houses that these fans are really liking. And so, we go into these rick houses that people are going crazy for in our private selections. Namely, originally, when we started, paying attention, it was Camp Nelson rick houses. And, you look in there and you find some inventory, which was the original Russell's 13. It's where Russell's 15 came from. Now we have a Russell's Rick House release that we do that's all come from Camp Nelson. And a lot of that did come from fan feedback because we know the whiskey that we like, but, it's not just what we like. We have to kind of straddle that line of stuff that we like and we're really proud of and also what people want to drink.
Mm-hmm. And how has that changed over the years? I mean, tastes have changed so much, 50s through, the 70s. And then we had during the 70s, like that kind of die off of whiskey and bourbon. Got really popular overseas, like in Japan and so forth. Clear liquor became more popular here. And then we've seen this resurgence again. How has those the flavor profiles and the wants and needs of the consumer changed over the years?
I think it's just got a lot more diverse. So, if you look at after Prohibition, basically all the way until bourbon started to die off in the late 70s, early 80s with the vodka coming into the United States, there were more brands than there were in the 80s, but everybody was kind of making similar stuff for the most part. It was a lot of bottled and bond type products. and then you saw like it really narrowed down in the 80s when a lot of brands in the 70s and 80s started to go under, and you just had kind of the big legacy, you know, six, seven, or eight distilleries, depending on what era. And then you look at the whiskey industry now in the United States, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of distilleries. I mean, every single state in the country's got a whiskey distillery going. Lord, here in Kentucky, there's probably one in every single county. The consumer has changed, and that's really what's changed our industry. My dad and Jimmy talk a lot about most of the people that they would talk to when they'd go on the road were one of three people. It would be people in Japan, people in Australia, or people that looked like them. So Southern people, Southern old men, basically, 40 and older dudes that lived in the South. And now our consumer is a worldwide consumer. It's well, depending on what country, sometimes 18 and up, but here in the States, 21 and up. And it's all different types of people, all walks of life from every single state. And all those people like different things. So now you can't just have, 101, which is what we have. And every major distillery just really had their one brand. And now we've got everything from flavored whiskey to 81 proof whiskey, all the way up to, super rare, high proof, non-chill filtered, nerdy stuff, because everybody wants it. So we have to be conscious of when we put something out, not, again, not just what we like, but which of our consumer base is going to want this. And, does it fit what they want, whether that's price or what the package looks like or what the liquid tastes like. Where back in the day, Jimmy would talk a lot about like, I just stuck stuff that I thought was good in the 101 bottle and I figured it would sell, And that's why if you look at all our limited editions, they all just came in 101 bottles. Like they didn't even change the bottle for the most part. Where today, just about every single one of our products has its own unique, really everything.
There is so much kind of to digest there. And especially over the different generations, again, having an influence on, the next generation and what you guys are all doing, the market, et cetera. So what is your like why? Like easily as a third generation person in this business, at some point you could have been, you know what, I really don't want to do it. Jimmy, your grandpa and or your dad are doing. Why did you continue this tradition and what is your personal like thing that motivates you?
Well, it's changed kind of throughout my career. And it is interesting because until my generation, there's only ever been kind of like one in each generation that stuck it out. Because Jimmy's dad worked at the distillery too, and my great grandpa. But my brother didn't want to get in it. He grew up in Lawrenceburg right alongside me, and I didn't want to get in it at first. And then I started giving tours there when I was 21, just for kind of an easy summer job. I'd make my $10 an hour and go back to school after the summer was over. And a couple months in, Dad kind of took me aside and had realized, I was showing a little bit more interest and started to teach me not just what we do, but why we do it. And he took me around for probably 4 or 5 hours one afternoon. And, if we hung out for 5 hours, that was probably 4 hours and 45 more minutes. And he'd ever talked to me before. He's really
Hmm.
quiet at home. And him and Jimmy both are. And so a light bulb kind of, lit up above my head when that happened in a way that was kind of like, man, I don't really know Dad. Like I didn't know that he was that passionate. I didn't know that I didn't know he could talk even. I didn't know he was smart and passionate and good at his job like he was. And it made me more interested in the product and the process. And it made me more interested in working there because I knew it was going to be a chance for me to get to know my family in a way that I didn't. And then as I've kind of developed in my career, I've realized, almost I don't trust anybody else to continue on Dad and Jimmy's legacy. And the thing that kind of gets me going is seeing people, whether it's local people in Lawrenceburg or people around the world, how excited they get to share with me their memories and their experiences with our product and tell me stories about Dad and Jimmy or how they drank the product with their granddad or dad. Like stories like that keep me going. And I think that my role or what I want to do as I continue in my career is kind of combine them. So at the distillery, we almost talk about like Jimmy whiskeys and Eddie whiskeys because their whiskeys are so different, their flavor profiles, even though we just have one recipe. And my goal is to kind of blend my favorite parts of both of their styles and kind of make what I think is the best thing we can do right now.
So that kind of goes into perfectly. Well, one, what an amazing story. I mean, that is absolutely awesome to want to see the benefit of like hanging out with your dad and spending all that time talking with him. I had something similar, just to share a personal story for myself, which was I lived in Seattle. My dad lived in Tacoma. I didn't get to see him very often either. And his whole thing is golf. And that's where I was like, I'm gonna start going down on a weekly basis and playing golf with him. And that was my way of spending time with him. 4 hours, 4 to 5 hours, just like you. And there's no like at least for me it was special because there's no real purpose other than being together, right?
Yeah,
And it's hard to do that in the day-to-day hectic, lives that we all have. So that's a beautiful story, man. Thanks for sharing that.
of course.
Are there moments, because you talked about how Eddie and Jimmy's whiskeys are so different, even though the recipe is the same, and with you coming in and wanting to blend kind of the best of of their whiskeys, like, is there sometimes a conflict of what people want in terms of, don't do this, or in terms of innovation, or trying to balance tradition with that innovation?
There's not that much now. I think there was maybe earlier in Dad's career. It took Dad a long time, and it's something that I have a lot of respect for Dad because he dealt with my granddad when my granddad was like still in charge of everything. And when you're tough on your son, and Dad really did have to prove himself. I mean, he was master distiller after 34 years. That's a lot longer than most people in modern times wait until they're named master distiller. There are a lot of people at 34 years old that are master distiller, much less worked in a place that long. They've both been super generous and gracious to me, and Jimmy is that way with Dad now, where we all, even though we all kind of have our own favorites, we all have a lot of faith in each other. Part of that is because I do butter up Jimmy real well, and I know the right things to say, and my tastes a lot more are in line with him than Dad's are. But it'll be something that Dad's working on. It might not be Jimmy's favorite thing because he has a very narrow view of what good whiskey is. Where me and Dad, we're a little broader in our palates. But if it's Dad's thing, Jimmy's proud of it, and he lets Dad do his thing. Now he might remind people that's my boy Eddie's thing.
Yeah.
But it is funny because you look at some of the stuff that's won it's our highest awarded stuff, or people go crazy for it on the secondary market, and or it's like once in a lifetime whiskey, whether it's a Russell's 98 that Dad put out, or the Russell's 15 that just came out, or some of his best master's keeps that he's done. And to Jimmy, all that stuff, he's like, I just like one-on-one and rare breed. He's old school, but now there's not too much conflict anymore. I'd say the stuff that's been the hardest that we've done is stuff that actually has Jimmy involved. So, like Generations last year, this 70th this year, because if it's going to have his name on it, we want to make sure that he's tasting it, even though the 70th was pretty much a surprise until very recently. We do want him tasting the liquid, and, getting his approval on something's, it's not easy because he's a stickler. He really likes his whiskey one certain way, and we even know what he likes. So, but you usually do have to give him, 4, 5, 6 Generations. I probably took him 10 samples before we finally found one that he thought was really good.
So that's a great segue into this new release. It's a commemorative release for Jimmy, right? Named Jimmy Russell Wild Turkey, Jimmy Russell 8-year-old bourbon, right?
Yep, 8-year 101, and it's going to have a 70th anniversary kind of tag on there as well as part of the logo.
And that 70th anniversary is a call out to Jimmy for how long he's been at Wild Turkey and still to this day getting his hands dirty, or I would say still giving tours and telling stories, right?
Yeah, I actually just saw a buddy of mine sent me a picture. He went to the distillery today to get Jimmy to sign some bottles, and my granddad was sitting right in there signing bottles and shaking hands, and he had a whole line of people waiting for him. The new visitor center's really kind of put a pep in his step. Dad said it's almost like he's 70 again, because he's coming back to work every day, even Saturdays and Sundays. Him and my granny, who also worked at the distillery at one time, they sit in there together, and he signs bottles and she eats popcorn and candy, and they talk to people and tell stories, and he loves being out there. And this is his 70th year. He's been working there since he was 19. The only thing he's done longer, he's been married to my grandma one more year than he's been working there. But he's the longest tenured master distiller in the history of spirits that we know of that's recorded. And there's no way he'll ever retire. My dad and me always joked that Dad will retire before Jimmy one day. Uh, Now at this point, I think maybe I'll retire before Jimmy does one day, because he every now and then he'll act like he's slowing down or something, but next thing I know, he's been at the distillery for 3 or 4 weeks in a row, and I don't go out on Saturdays and Sundays, but he does.
I find that amazing. He's got a purpose, right? Like
Yeah.
this is his life, his journey, and now he's with that new visitor center. It sounds like he's got something else he really enjoys, which is again, it sounds like telling stories and just meeting people. That's absolutely amazing. This process of coming up with this release sounds like it was a little bit of a challenge getting Jimmy's approval. And what are some other challenges and wins that you had, not just with this release, but with Wild Turkey, I would say over the years while you've been there?
So I'll start with this release, and I'll go to the other stuff. So I think stuff that really stands out to me about this release, it really does represent everything I think my granddad's about, and that is high quality whiskey for kind of for every man or every person, because he grew up in a family that didn't have a lot. He worked his way kind of from the bottom up. He lives a very modest life, and he thinks everything should be super inexpensive. And so when we were going to do this product, we knew we wanted to put together something he'd be really proud of. He is Mr. 8-Year 101, so that part was easy, but it was finding the right barrels and the old Tyrone rick houses that he kind of grew up with in his career, the oldest one we've got on site, and blending that whiskey together and putting in this beautiful package. And it's going to be on shelf at $50. And compared to most of our other limited editions and anybody's limited editions now, that's kind of unheard of. And it's going to be a pretty large release. It's the largest limited release that I know of in my career that we've done, because it's something that we want everybody to be able to get a hold of if they want to, because that's what Jimmy's Whiskey's always been about. It's been about accessibility, really. Other stuff that has really stood out to me, that have been successes, have been, it's kind of been the growth of our higher end stuff. So Wild Turkey for a long time, and especially in the 80s and 90s when bourbon wasn't doing so hot, there's a certain connotation, I think, behind our brand and behind a lot of bourbons that, only a certain type of person drank it. That stuff, bottom shelf. And that's where bourbon belonged. And we're not the only brand that this has happened to, but I think the thing that I'm most proud of is, I always had believed this growing up, but now I think everybody does, that you can put our high end stuff up against any other spirit in the world and it's going to stand toe to toe. So stuff like the Masters Keeps, stuff like Russell's 13 and Russell's 15 really stand out to me. And then, even just some of our stuff we've had around, like Rare Breed, people have come around on that product. And it's something we've had around since the 90s, but it's only been until, the last handful of years that people have really started to talk about it like one of the best whiskeys in the world.
And how are you guys promoting that? Like changing kind of, I wouldn't say everybody's mind, like one, you talk about generations. It's a whole, every person that gets introduced to bourbon, it's a whole nother journey for them of discovery, right? Another opportunity to put Wild Turkey in front of them and go, look at what we've done. So like, how have you done? It's marketing, right? And working with distributors and bars and so forth. What are some of your favorite things you've done to get in front of customers?
I would say something that really stands out to me, and this is something that a real good friend of mine that works in the bar industry once got up and said in front of a group of people that me, Jimmy, and Dad were at, kind of an educational thing we were doing, and said the thing that really stands out about our family and about our brand is the accessibility to the people involved. So I think a huge part of it has been me, Dad, and Jimmy, and now also my cousin Joanne, who's on the road as a brand ambassador. We've always been willing to give a lot of ourselves to people that are interested. So time and effort and travel in the world, and it's something that Jimmy talks about a lot. It doesn't matter if it's a audience of 4,000 or 5,000 that are at this big whiskey fest, or an auditorium over in Asia, or if it's 3 people that'll sit in line at a liquor store in the middle of nowhere in Kentucky. If somebody wants to talk to you about the brand or tell you a story or get you to sign a bottle, you do it, because those people are the reason we get to do what we do. And so I think our willingness to travel and really engage with people in a genuine fashion has really helped our stuff. And then I think there's been a couple communities that have really helped us outside of our own company, and even us. One of those is the bartending community. They've really embraced our brands. Part of that is, Dad and Jimmy both hung out in bars and figured out how important the bartenders were becoming at the beginning of the boom when people started drinking old fashions, Manhattans, and Boulevardiers again. And your real first line of offense now, it's not just your company people, it's the bartender. So when somebody goes to a bar and they get a pour of whiskey or they get a cocktail that's got Russell's or 101 in it, that bartender is willing to tell you how cool it was when he met Eddie or Jimmy or Bruce or Joanne or whoever. Like, that really matters. And then, this whole crazy bourbon nerd scene, like, they're used to not, I remember growing up, the whole bourbon journalist scene was like two guys. That didn't exist. People that would be interested in our limited edition bottles, they were very few and far between, or they lived in Japan. Nobody wanted Jimmy to sign a bottle. Nobody sold whiskey on the secondary market and stuff like that. That stuff just didn't exist. And for whatever reason, that community has really embraced us and figured out that we make really good whiskey, and we've been making really good whiskey. And they go crazy for the old 70s and 80s Wild Turkey bottles. They go crazy we had hundreds of people lined up for Russell's 15. It took our visitor center by surprise. So many people showed up. We had people trying to show up the day before, camping out at our Walmart parking lot in our local community just so they could get there super early. So they've helped change us too. And it's slowly, all that combined has slowly helped change, everybody's notions about like what Wild Turkey is. And now, kind of the sky's the limit on what we're able to do and what we're able to put into the bottle and how good the whiskey can be. So it's good for everybody. The whiskey's better, sales are better, everybody's doing well.
Yeah. Congratulations on that. I mean, it's true. I mean, there are definitely, I love how you say it's nerding out. Like the fanatics around collecting, bourbon is for real now, for real. And part of it is just being able to show off. I got this. And
Yeah.
and having that story now, because like having that story of getting yours or Jimmy's or Eddie's signature, and having that conversation, not only from the bartender, but from anybody. That's part of the collection, right? And being able to share that with others. Bring it back to the 70th anniversary 8-year-old bottle. Like, I think there's some interesting tasting notes that y'all have put out there. Could you walk us through, and like, what is the specific flavor profile for you out of this and what people should expect?
Yeah. So this is something that I would really consider kind of a Jimmy whiskey. So, Wild Turkey does have one recipe, and we definitely have, I think, a specific note on all of our whiskeys that shines through. But Jimmy whiskey is definitely its own thing. So what we were looking for in this, and I think what we achieved, is there's a whole lot of sweetness, there's some earthiness and some spice with a little bit of oak in there as well. So Jimmy does like really classic sweetness. So your caramels, kind of your butterscotch, and then a lot of my granddad's whiskeys had this kind of like dark fruit note that I associate with cherry a lot, but I've heard people call it plum or some other things. Something that sets, I think, his whiskey style apart from something like Dad's whiskey is a lot of my granddad's whiskey is a little earthier, and so there'll be like these like tea notes and sweet tobacco notes that aren't really present in Dad's whiskey, and I particularly really like that. One thing that Jimmy also does is he chews tobacco, and so that it's very nostalgic, that kind of sweet tobacco nose, because it's something I grew up around, and I love that note, and that really does shine through in this whiskey. It's also got a little bit of oak and spice, and so it's got good age on it. It's 8 and 9-year-old whiskey, so you are going to get some mature oak on there, but there's also that really classic, and this is in all our whiskeys, that kind of mid-palate spice, that kind of kick in Wild Turkey. We call it clove at the distillery is the note that we use, but black pepper, cinnamon, baking spices, almost all of our whiskey kind of peaks in the mid palate, and this does that as well. So this is old school turkey. And I will say, we do have an 8-year-old 101 product that is exported out of the United States currently. This is not that product. This is its own unique blend. And we wanted to make sure that this really represented kind of the old school, quote unquote, Jimmy way of doing it, as opposed to our modern 8-year-old 101.
What is the difference between this and the modern 8-year and the 101, the traditional 101?
Yeah, so the traditional 101 is a blend of 6 and older whiskeys. So right now it's 6 to 8-year-old, all coming from different cuts of the rick house, coming from almost every single rick house we've got. We've got 30-something rick houses now between all our locations, and just about every single one of them is going to be blended into 101 when we do a 101 dump. the 101 is a little bit closer to this in flavor profile. This just got more age on it. I think it's a more complex, more well-rounded whiskey, to be honest, and a little bit more. It's got a little bit more depth of flavor. It's almost like traditional 101 ramped up to 11.
Mm.
And The export 8-year old 101, even though it's an 8-year old 101, I do think that it trends a little bit more modern, so a little bit more like my dad's flavor profile. It tends to be a little oakier. It tends to have a little bit more of a lighter sweetness, so it's got a little bit more of that kind of traditional, like dad's traditional sweet cream, vanilla, honey, kind of citrus note, as opposed to those like dark fruits, that earthiness that this kind of Jimmy 70th has.
What is Jimmy 70th? What does it go well with in terms of like a cocktail? Like if you could recommend people at home that get their hands on this bottle and want to make a cocktail versus sipping it straight, what is the go-to for you?
Yeah, so for me, and I think for Dad and Jimmy, we almost always drink our whiskey neat. So, but if you're not going to drink this neat or on a rock, I would definitely probably use this in something that's kind of dark and spirit forward. For those very traditional, old fashions, Manhattans, those style of cocktails, that old fashioned style, because of that kind of that dark sweetness, that kind of earthiness, it's just going to pair really, really well with kind of those prohibition era cocktails where our traditional 101 or even the export 8, they work great in those cocktails, but I was been drinking on some regular 101 paper planes because it works
Mm.
really well and kind of also it's so hot here in Kentucky. It's like 102 degrees yesterday here in Louisville. And it worked really well in those kind of refreshing style cocktails. But I think Jimmy's going to be better in those fall winter kind of spirit forward cocktails.
Yeah, something savory.
Yeah.
Especially when you talk about the earthiness, right? What it's known for sure. Yeah, I am not envious of your 102 degrees and probably super humid down there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's been rough, but we had such a nice like past month that it caught up to us eventually. So it's been miserable here for the past week or so. But you know what? It's good for the whiskey, so we'll deal with it. The hotter it gets, the more flavors being developed in those barrels. So we'll deal with it.
When is the best time to come to Wild Turkey, to visit? Like, is it literally in the summer when it's 102 degrees, or is it better off coming when it's cooler out?
I wouldn't say it's right now for a couple reasons. One, it's so hot, even though it's really pretty here right now. It's really hot, and we're shut down. So traditionally, most of the big distilleries shut down during the summer months to do maintenance, and so our distillery is actually not running currently. So there's less to see. I think that the prettiest time to come, or the best time to come, is in the fall. So there's a lot of things to do. The weather will be really nice. We sit about 250 feet above the river, the Kentucky River. We have these beautiful rolling hills that are covered in forest, and those leaves will all kind of turn colors at the same time every year, and it's just really pretty about mid fall. And the horses will be racing right up the road at Keeneland, and we've got the football weather going, big SEC football games right up the road, and it's a little bit nicer to drink whiskey when there's a little bit of a nip in the air. So I think the fall is usually the best time to come.
Yeah, and for me, I like drinking it outside anyways instead of being
Yeah.
inside. Yeah, yeah, I love that. So what's next for you and for Wild Turkey? Are there any new initiatives outside of this 70-year, Jimmy's 70th year?
Well, yeah, I'll tell you, we've got a lot of stuff in the works. They'd get after me if I told you exactly what we were doing, but I think you can look forward to seeing more of what we've been doing when you look at stuff like Generations and this 70th anniversary and the Russell's 15. Like we're really on a roll right now with our innovations, and in the next handful of years, I think you'll be able to see that continue. We've got a lot of fun stuff in the works, stuff that I'm working on, stuff that me and Dad are working on. And we don't do anything without letting Jimmy approve it at the very end. So he'll be in that visitor center tasting it and tell me what he thinks.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. What, like that kind of brings up another question for me, honestly, which is how do you maintain kind of like that legacy of your dad as you innovate and bring in new product? I mean, does he have to put a stamp on everything, or is it more like, the stuff like 101, et cetera, like he's super serious about?
first and foremost, I feel the same way Dad does, where I'm never going to change stuff that's been laid down before me. So like he's never changed, one on one, and kind of the foundation that Jimmy laid down with that, or Kentucky Spirit, or Rare Breed, and I'm never going to try to mess with Dad's stuff, like Russell's 10 and Russell's 6-year old stuff like that. However, I've got my own ideas and some stuff that I'd like to do, and Dad is honestly very generous with his time and effort to train me, and but he's also willing to allow me to do my own thing. So I will want to get his approval, or at least have him taste stuff. But on some stuff that I'm working on and stuff that you'll probably see down the line as I continue to in my career, I'll do probably a lot of it on my own. But just like Dad does with Jimmy, I'm no dummy. So towards the end, I'll make sure that Dad and Jimmy, if he's willing to, still try it and tell me what they think, because I want to be able to do my own things. But I never want to get away from the foundation that they've both laid. I've made the comment to a few people. I love my job. I'm very lucky to get to do what I do, and my job's going to be pretty easy compared to most other people's in a similar position, because I've got all this good whiskey to play with. Dad and Jimmy are both really good at what they do. Our team at the distillery is really good at what they do. So all the stuff I'm going to get to blend together, man, that whiskey's really good. So I'm just really excited to get in the lab every day and work on some new products.
Yeah, and there's so much history and wisdom that you get to tap into as well. So that's awesome, man. I'm excited to see what you come up with. What advice would you give someone looking to get into the bourbon industry today? Like especially given it, like you just mentioned, some people may be starting with zero influence outside of maybe what they're buying off the shelf and nobody to really work with.
I would say if you're getting into the bourbon industry, because the bourbon industry is kind of a unique thing compared to other spirits. If you're wanting to get into bourbon or American whiskey, I would say the best advice that I could give you is be loud, be annoying, knock on doors, ask questions, show up to stuff, bug people. And what I mean by that is like the bourbon industry, I think more so than almost any other spirits industry, it's just a group of good old people in Kentucky, in Tennessee, in southern Indiana for the most part, now around the United States. But there's still this kind of feeling that we all know each other. It's kind of familial when we see each other. And, I know you, you work in the industry, we're getting a drink at the bar, we're having dinner together. And so if you want to get in this, if you're starting a brand or you're starting at a distillery, like if you see a Jimmy Russell, if you see an Eddie Russell, those type of people, go up and ask them questions. Go up and bug them, email them, email me. That's something that Jimmy's always done my whole life, that if somebody wanted to come tour the distillery or ask us questions about what we were doing or pick his brain or have him taste their whiskey and give his opinions, he would always do that. He had me when I was starting out, like, hey, boy, take these people around. And they just be distillery people that were starting a new operation somewhere in the United States. I couldn't believe he was letting them see everything we were showing them. But he said, he's always been one of those people like help everybody out. A rising tide raises all ships type of thing. The better the bourbon industry gets, the more brands are out there that are doing well. It's just going to be better for us. And if you're getting into the industry, you should come in with that mindset that if you're passionate enough and loud enough and you'll beat down enough doors, man, people will be willing to help you. This is an awesome industry. They'll be willing to give you their time and help you out. And of all the stuff I've seen, happen over the last 5 or 10 years, if you've got a cool idea and you've got work ethic, you can make something really, really awesome happen.
That's awesome. And don't be scared. Embrace. And it sounds like you all are an amazing community that welcome other people, especially curiosity. So that's awesome to hear. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to share with the viewers? Is there anything that you wished I would have asked you that I didn't cover?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. I would say the thing I'd like for the viewers to get and that maybe we didn't touch on is, hey, come visit us. Come to Kentucky. Come hang out the Bourbon Trail. We just opened up a brand new visitor center. It's absolutely beautiful. Beautiful views, great cocktails, some snacks. Jimmy will be hanging out in there. And come say what's up. Not just our location. Come to Kentucky and hang out. Get involved. Be loud on the internet. this is a really cool community, and it's not just for people that are wanting to get into the industry. Even if you're just a fan, I've met some of my best friends. They don't work in the industry, but they're just bourbon nerds, whiskey people that I met either online or they've come visit me at the distillery. So come hang out. That's what we're here for. And if y'all ever see me or Dad or Mimi or my cousin Joanne out at a bar or doing anything else, repping the brand, holler at us. We'll drink a shot of wild turkey with you.
That's awesome. I hope I get to see that. I was just down there in Louisville, I don't know, a couple months ago. I would have loved to come down for the Bourbon Festival, which is that happening in September or when is that?
It is. It's happening in just a couple weeks. So yeah, if y'all get a chance, we'll be down there. Our brand will be represented down at the Bourbon Festival down in Bardstown, and there'll be some cool pours, and it's a neat little thing. We've been going to it since we were kids. When I was real little, it literally our whole booth was just a big table, and Jimmy and my granny would sit there, and my granny would bring some flowers and decorate this little table, and Jimmy would just sit there and pour rare breed for people. It's a lot bigger than that now, but we'll still be down there hanging out.
You gonna bring any flowers too this time?
No, it won't be me. Maybe I can get my lady to bring some flowers like Granny used to back in the day, but we'll still be pouring some cool stuff.
Man, it would be a great way to bring back in the 70th year, for Jimmy, right? Like we're gonna
Yeah.
decorate the table like we did back then. That'd be amazing. And also, best time fall to go visit Wild Turkey. But obviously, any time is a great time, except for summer when you guys are shut down. Obviously, the tasting room is probably still open, but you're kind of missing out on some of the other cool parts of a tour. Um, Bruce, thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing those stories and the adventure with Jimmy and your dad Eddie. Really fascinating stuff, and appreciate everything you all are doing. And for those of you watching, have an amazing day. We are out.